One of the interesting narratives that surfaced with the release of the weeks before, like the last Nintendo Direct, was that F-Zero 99 would not do very well. There were a handful of people, including the BitBlock, Demi, Sean Malmstrom, a handful of Nintendo online personalities who were coming out trying to say this is a travesty, this is something that nobody wanted, this is gonna bomb, it's gonna be forgotten a month from now, right? This is gonna be a complete disaster that will kill the F-Zero IP for good. And of course, I contested this. I called this out for what it was. I said the game looked great. I said it was promising. I said it was indicative that Nintendo was interested in revisiting the F-Zero IP, like for a full $60 game. But this was a really nice surprise from the Direct, right? It wasn't the biggest thing I was excited about in the Direct. Like I had some problems with what we were shown, right? I would have preferred something based off of F-Zero X specifically instead of the Super Nintendo game. But like, that's just me being a nitpick. That's just me being like, yeah, I would have liked this, and this. But like, when all is said and done, I was interested in what I saw. And when I actually played the game, I realized that, like, wow, this is probably the best 99 game they've put out. And I'm surprised at seeing the sheer amount of people who agree with me. There are a lot of people coming out saying this game is great, that it was like super overlooked, that it's really exciting, one of the best things in the Direct. And like, a lot of people are in line with what I was saying, right? Which kind of surprised me because there were a lot of projects that were really unfairly treated in this Nintendo Direct. Like I've been talking a lot about Super Mario Bros. Wonder and how most people are trying to say it's not a major Nintendo release. I've talked before about Detective Pikachu Returns and how a lot of people don't realize that that's going to be fairly successful. Like there were a handful of games that were like unfairly criticized by the gaming community, right? Unicorn Overlord isn't being talked about as much as it should. Like, it was an interesting Direct because a lot of people like made some claims, made some narratives, but when all was said and done, F-Zero 99, in spite of the complaints from Demish, from Shokio, from Sean Malmstrom, from the BitBlock, like, has been doing very, very well for itself. And this is really what I want to emphasize. This, I think, is the most important thing we Nintendo fans need to talk about going forward, in that Nintendo YouTubers, forum posters, moderators, Twitter users, gaming journalists, like, they do not speak for us, right? They do not control the market. They are not some harbingers of like what's good and what's bad. They are not like particularly well-rounded gamers. They don't even like playing games a lot of times. Like, these guys are completely out of touch with what the market responds to and what it enjoys. And we see them constantly rag on about games that really don't matter, right? Like, complaining about things that don't matter, seeing people, the big stereotype for these people, back in the day was that, like, complaining about JRPGs, but, I think it's extending to other things as well. Like, we're seeing Detective Pikachu get criticized. You're seeing 2D Mario get criticized. You're seeing these people trying to tell you that Nintendo Switch 2 needs to come out next year, for no real reason, mind you, but like, they just need the clicks. Like, you have these people making these wild claims about F-Zero 99, about these games. Like, you have these people just putting out these crazy theories, these crazy ideas, like saying certain games are going to fail and then just completely and utterly getting destroyed by reality. And F-Zero 99 is, I think, one of the best possible examples of that, because this was a game from a dormant IP that these people like consistently said they wanted, that like it came out of nowhere with a new release, and that like that release was hugely successful in spite of their claims. So like, within like 10 minutes, of this game being shown off, you had people like coming out saying it was going to fail, that it was going to kill F-Zero, that it was going to do this, that Nintendo didn't give us what we wanted. And then like reality set in, and this game actually did fairly well for itself, right? This game is actually very popular. And I am just it's getting appalling how often this happens with Nintendo releases, right? Like if it's not something that's like popular among the community, something like Pikmin 4 or like Tears of the Kingdom or what have you, like it just gets written off and ignored, right? Fire Emblem Engage, like it's crazy. Like I've been like I've been browsing some subreddits and stuff like that, looking at like the weird reception to this game. It's bizarre seeing people try to tell you this game is like terrible, or that like it has no redeeming factors at all, or that it was censored, or that like the game isn't that great, when in reality it's actually a pretty good FE game. Like I much prefer it to Fire Emblem Fates, right? Like I don't like it nearly as much as Awakening or Three Houses, but like those are some of my favorite games ever, right? Like I love those games, right? Like saying Engage isn't nearly as good as that. Like that's not a knock against Engage at all. Like I am very fond of what Engage tried to do. Like I think Engage took a lot of risks and tried to innovate, and like I really respect it for that. There are plenty of things I like about Engage in spite of not being quite on the level of like some of my other favorite FEs. And like when I think about it, like FE Echoes, Shadows of Valentia, like my third favorite Fire Emblem game ever, like that didn't do very well either. I remember when that came out and people were writing that off as well for like a variety of nonsensical reasons. Like until Dread came out, like people were knocking Metroid Samus Returns, right? That was a game that people came after. I've just been seeing, I just gotten done like fighting with people on 4chan about No More Heroes 3, and how everybody is still trying, like 2 years later, still trying to pretend as if the game was bad or a disappointment, or that Suda screwed the pooch or whatever, when really I think actual fans are perfectly satisfied with it. Like I am perfectly satisfied with it. Like I see more and more people in my community talking about like, kind of taking jabs at the No More Heroes 3 community. Like I just the backlash for that. Like it's just so absurd. Like more and more we're seeing people like make up more and more insane narratives about Nintendo. Like I'm still seeing people try to constantly it's crazy. Like Sony tried censoring a game a while back. I don't remember what it was. Like Sony did it, right? It was 100% them, but like you'll always see people try to bring Nintendo into the discussion. Like every time this kind of situation happens, like people will try to like spin it as being like, oh, even Nintendo wouldn't do this, or that like this is something Nintendo would do, or that like Sony's becoming just as bad as Nintendo, even though like Nintendo doesn't actually do any of the things that they say they do. It's really weird, right? And it's been a narrative that's been in place since the 90s, like something that like the community is desperately trying to hold on to by any way they possibly can, right? Like they will hold on to any anti-Nintendo sentiment they possibly can. And right now, when it comes to F-Zero 99, like we are on the verge of like F-Zero making a full revival, right? It reminds me a lot of like what happened when Metroid Prime Federation Force got announced. We got Samus Returns a year after that, and we got Dread in 2022. Like, right, yeah, we got Dread in 2021, right? And then like we have Metroid Prime 4 on the way, Metroid Prime Remastered. Like we got a real resurgence of Metroid games in the past couple of years, right? What happened? All the people crying about like Metroid not getting supported enough, like tried to flip and say that like, oh, these new games aren't good, like other games are better, this is underwhelming, this isn't what I wanted. Like they'll try and do anything they possibly can to like try and pretend that like Dread wasn't successful, that Prime Remastered wasn't a big deal, that like Samus Return, like they did a lot of that. And it seems like we're in the early stages of the same thing happening with F-Zero, where we're going to see a bunch of people who claim to be huge, hardcore fans of F-Zero, right? Hardcore fans who were desperately waiting these past 20 years for a new game. We're going to see these people flip, right? And say that like the new one isn't good, and that Nintendo has underwhelmed us very, like it happened already, right? We've already seen people do this with 99. So again, what these people are going to do is that they're just going to like stop talking about F-Zero. They're not going to say anything positive about the new games, and they're just going to find some other Nintendo IP to like leech off of. Like my guess would be Kid Icarus. That seems to be what people are leaning to right now as like the next major like dormant Nintendo IP that they can just exploit. Like after like they're really gonna do this like after what happened when that game came out, after like the huge like campaign to pretend that the controls didn't work and that the game was like completely broken. Like after all of that, like they're really going to come out and say that like Kid Icarus Uprising needs like Kid Icarus like needs a new game, right? Like I love Kid Icarus and I'm anxiously awaiting Uprising 2, but like or Uprising HD, but like you have to understand that like after how that game was received, like why would Nintendo be in a hurry to put out a sequel, right? Like there's a reason they had to wait as long as they did. Like there's a reason these things happen. Like there's a reason. Like it's crazy how even now, right? Like people will just kind of will try to tell you that like, oh, the only Switch game I'm looking forward to is Prime 4. Like I'm not interested in Mario Wonder, I'm not interested in Zelda Pikachu Returns, I'm not interested in Unicorn Overlord or Princess Peach Showtime or another Code R or like Apollo Justice. Like I just want Metroid Prime 4, right? I just want Metroid Prime 4 because that's the only game I care about. That's the only game that appeals to real men. That's the only game that appeals to real gamers, right? Like that's the mindset, right? Like Metroid Prime as a series is something that like only regularly sells like what, a couple of million units at best, right? But these guys are like seriously coming out and saying that this is like the only thing they care about, that they don't know anything about Mario Wonder because they're just so uninterested. Like all they care about is seeing Metroid Prime 4. It's appalling, really. Like I can understand like waiting for the release of a new IP of like of an IP you love. Like I had to wait a decade for Pikmin 4. I had to wait like 20 years for A Link to the Past 2, A Link Between Worlds, right? I had to wait for like Metroid, 2D Metroid to make a comeback, Metroid Prime, but like I understand why this happened. Like I not only I was playing other games. When Metroid went on its hiatus, I was playing a lot of great games. When Metroid went on hiatus, Donkey Kong Country came back. Can you imagine how elated I was seeing like my favorite one of my like my the one of the very first video games I ever played, if not the very first video game I ever played, Donkey Kong Country coming back. Like, can you like I was ecstatic, like I was thrilled. And what happened? Like everybody just spit on it, everybody ignored it. Like nobody wants 2D platformers in 2011. And like, they put out the best game ever made in the genre, Tropical Freeze, and like it was just ignored, right? Like, and now these same people have the audacity to complain about not getting new Donkey Kong games. After how they reacted after Tropical Freeze was first shown off, right? And this cannot be said enough, is that these guys cannot be happy with what they're given. They cannot be happy with the games that do get made and have to incessantly complain about things that they aren't getting, right? And it just never stops, right? And this is the takeaway I want to give to you, right? My fellow gamers, right? That like we need to stop taking these people so seriously. Like we need to stop paying attention to them. We need to stop like acknowledging them. Like they have no idea, right, what's popular. They have no idea what people buy. They have no idea what's going to become successful and what's not. They have no idea what's going to get made and what isn't. And they have no idea what's good and what's bad. Right? Like we've seen this happen time and time again. But why exactly would you ever take a gaming YouTuber all that seriously? These people have no merit, they have no credibility, and I have no respect for them whatsoever. F-Zero 99 is merely a single example as to why I feel that way.